Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session where we're going to bring the power of Microsoft Visio to your business. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Chris, and with me is Rav, and we're basically bringing you this session on behalf of Microsoft today. We'll do a little bit of an introduction just to begin with, and we'll let you kind of know who you're speaking to, who your presenters are. So, some of you may know me. My name's Chris. I'm a Office 365 specialist working for a company called Combined Knowledge. My role at Combined Knowledge is to sort of manage the training team as well as the content that we create for our courses and video products. My contact information is up on the screen there, so it's chris.casangina@combined-knowledge.com. Outside of Combined Knowledge, I also work alongside Microsoft on their step-by-step book series. So we're kind of bringing a lot of experience to the fold today in regards to Microsoft products. I'll also introduce you to my colleague Rav, who will introduce himself.
Hi there, guys. My name is Ravinder Sandhu. I'm a digital solutions consultant delivering training. I've got about 20 years of training in the Microsoft suites from the basic applications, Word, Excel, up to advanced level. Also, Visio is another product I deliver with Project, and also some Dynamics AX CRM systems that we deliver. I've been also training in various training firms that deliver training, but also organisations, for example, the Law Society, the SRA, where I did a lot of training for them for 15 years. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Rav. So as you can probably imagine, this is going to be a bit of banter between myself and Rav as we kind of go through the sessions today, just to kind of give you as much insights as possible into our topic of the day. Just before we kick off, we're going to make sure that you have everything that you need for the session today. So first of all, you only need a web browser. This is a hands-on session, so we will give you lots of opportunities to try the products out, but you don't need any applications installed on your computer. What you will need is a little bit obscure. You may need a sheet of paper. So if you've got your notebook in front of you, if you could tear a leaf out of that, we're going to use that for an exercise sort of towards the end of the mid-session. And we also are going to recommend grabbing a copy of our digital ebook. So for the session today, I'm just going to pop this into the chat window. Here's a link to our course manual for this session today. So we've got a couple of exercises that are going to walk you through some hands-on practical steps to achieve various Visio diagrams that we want you to build on the session today. So we've created guides for you. So at some point over the next few minutes, just check the chat panel, click on that link and download the file. It normally will open up in a web browser, depending on how you normally open up PDF files. But you can save your own copy. It's yours to keep. It'll just give you some instruction sets on how to build some diagrams through the Visio application. In addition to that, we're also going to kind of give you an instruction on various different formats and functions of Microsoft Visio, starting off with the all-important what is Visio. We'll be talking about ways that you can use Visio in your organization and a little bit of a focus on frontline workers. So the opportunity for us to kind of see how those who are kind of in the trenches, you know, the people who operate on the store, shop floor, people who might operate on a factory floor, these kind of examples, we're going to kind of show you how Visio can kind of fit in with your frontline workers. We'll also talk about licensing. Visio is quite an extensive product and it's got quite a legacy to it as well. So we want to make sure that you kind of understand in a new age of Office 365, how does it stand with its sort of licensing? And then we're going to kind of get into the meat of it by discovering Visio Online. Visio Online is the web version of Visio, so you only need a web browser to interact with it. It's a little bit more basic than the fully fledged application, as a lot of Microsoft web solutions are, but it offers a good selection of functionality to allow kind of mid-skilled level people to have the opportunity to build diagrams without the requirement for the kind of fully fledged desktop application, which has the sort of data connections and the more complex logic to it. After that, we'll give you an opportunity to try out an exercise. So once we've introduced Visio Online, we're going to give you a little bit of a hands-on exercise to try a few bits and pieces out yourself and become more skilled using the Visio application. After the break, which will take 15 minutes, which we'll have at about 3 o'clock, we're then going to talk about some new features in Microsoft Visio that integrate it into other applications. So we'll talk about the data visualizer for Visio to Excel. We're going to talk about the integration between Visio and Word and PowerPoint, and then we're going to finish off with a discussion around the Power Platform. So a little bit of a discussion about Power Automate and how that works with Visio, and also a discussion around Power BI and how that works with Visio as well. Some really useful functionality coming up over the next couple of hours. So we're very thankful that you've joined us for the session. We'll be concluding the session before or at 4:45. We did run this session this morning and we finished on time, but I think obviously there's always room for improvement, so we'll see how slick we can be. There is a questions panel. So as we kind of talk about the session today, can we just say that you're very welcome to ask questions as we go. So let us know if you have any queries about what we're talking about, how it relates to you. We're more than happy to kind of fill you in, give you the opportunity to learn a little bit more based on your own personal questions. As you go through the session, there'll be 3 physical exercises that you'll do on your own computer. So you've got the PDF file that will kind of give you the information for that. We mentioned that you do not need to install any software to do this. It's all done through the web browser, so no need to install the Visio application. And finally, we're also going to give you an account to use for the duration of the training today. So you don't need to use your own Office 365 account to do this. Some of you may not be licensed to use Visio anyway, so this just gives you that luxury of being able to practice the sessions in a tenant that's kind of disconnected from your own. Lastly, as we did mention, there is a paper-orientated exercise, a little bit of a kind of an ad hoc session just to give us a chance to kind of theorize a few ideas. So it's not mandatory, but if you can find a sheet of paper or tear a leaf out of your notebook, that'll be quite good for one of our exercises coming up. So myself and Rav are going to kind of take you through an overview of what is Visio. So we'll kick off with that topic first, and then we'll kind of move through the motions of usage scenarios and a discussion around frontline workers. So I guess one of the most integral things is, ask yourself the question, have you heard of Visio? Most likely you have, depending on how long you've been in the workplace. I mean, quite often Visio is discussed as a diagramming solution, but it's a hugely extensive application. So not can it just design professional and informative diagrams, but you may be surprised how it kind of actually has a sort of connection to lots of different roles. As a trainer, I use Visio to design course manuals. So some of you have been on our training courses may know, but in a situation where we give you a course manual, there are lots of step-by-step instructions. So what we do is we use Visio stencils to kind of have shapes that are flexible enough to stretch across diagrams and label them beautifully to make sure it's intuitive and straightforward to interpret the steps that we're trying to take you through. As well as Visio being great for diagrams, there's also the fact that it can allow you to collaborate with your colleagues. So multiple authors can potentially edit and comment on a Visio diagram at the same time. We can get insights into live data. That's a really powerful feature of Visio. Not just to kind of connect to data, but there's a way of interpreting raw tables of data and turning it into something much more visual is a huge benefit. And then also, Visio integrates into other Office 365 services to kind of bring the benefit of that application to others. So Rav, just a quick sort of bit of banter between the two of us. Have you ever sort of encountered people kind of building diagrams in any of the kind of workspaces that you've worked in?
Well, one of the organisations I've previously worked at, a lot of staff, including PAs and workers, would create Visio diagrams, shall we say, in Word. So they'd create process flows, organisation charts in Word, and also PowerPoint. The problem was when these are passed down to future PAs who join or someone else within the business, they struggle to actually build or recreate the existing chart and change it and structure it again to a new style. Now, I used to get phone calls left, right and centre asking, well, I'm stuck, Rav, what can I do? This is taking me hours and hours. So when I started to deliver Visio training to the business and to some of these departments, they couldn't believe how quick it was to use. It was a lot slicker, a lot more professional, no time wasted, everything connected. We didn't have to mess about with canvases, which is what you have to use in Word, for example. So yeah, there is other applications, but they're not as good.
Yeah, and I think one of the points that you made there, when you're working with an organizational chart, I mean, think of a business that has a high turnover of staff. That thing must be changing so frequently. If someone meticulously architected that diagram in Word, and quite often, if you want to change just one simple thing, you throw the whole thing out. Whereas with something like Visio, just a minor change will just flow down the diagram, make it much, much slicker.
I agree with that, Chris. You're right there, because Word, people spend hours and hours making these changes. And once you show them what you can do in Visio, you can probably get a whole new structure in Visio, an organization chart, while they're spending 3 hours in Word.
Rav, I will admit to you that I literally spent probably, and I admittedly say, 30 minutes on a slide about a week and a half ago. And it was just connecting boxes to boxes. And it just took forever. Absolutely forever. I won't show you the slide because you'll probably say you spent all that time on that, but it's a bit embarrassing. I literally went to my partner. I said, she goes, "Oh, you finished late." I was like, "Yeah, I was connecting boxes together with lines." And God, there must be a faster way of doing it than that. So what we want to do is we want to kind of delve into those points. When we talked about what is Visio, we talked about things like diagrams, we talked about things like integration and data, and these kind of things are a huge benefit. So let's talk about diagramming for a second. So we actually had someone from a very much a sort of floor plan-led job role who was on our previous AM session today. And he was informing us how he used Visio in his day-to-day role. There are an extensive selection of diagrams, from business processes to floor plans to timelines. It's extensive as it can be. The great thing about it is that it's hugely flexible. Whatever your starting point, a diagram is simply just shapes and connectors. And the great thing about Visio is it makes it beautifully simple to connect these components together. In the example you can see to the right, we're just simply gluing these connector points to different sides of a shape. And although that may seem very intuitive to you, that, for someone who's never seen the product before, could be a great segue into the utilization of this tool. If we're talking about collaboration, some of you have probably used co-authoring, which is a fantastic feature of Office 365. As long as your data is stored in OneDrive, Teams, or SharePoint, multiple authors could potentially come into the same application or web interface at the same time and work on the same document. Co-authoring means that multiple authors could potentially work on the same Visio diagram. They could change shapes, they could add comments, and this could assist with tight deadlines. Just to jump back to Rav in regards to, you know, how much time that can save, if there's any kind of sort of scenario that you've encountered where, you know, collaboration can speed things up.
Well, we're working in the project teams when we are developing business process diagrams with the BAs, business analysts. Previously, when there was no co-authoring in Visio, we were going back and forth, loads of narratives, waiting for people to come back with their Visio diagrams. They haven't completed them just yet. Times where we've had to phone them, speak on the phone, trying to get it done. And since Visio's brought out the co-authoring, it's just made life so easy, shall we say. We can phone up, get online. We're both using it at the same time. We can agree that this process should be this side, and this process should be in there, and it should be in the next diagram. So it's just saves time. It's a great way of getting things done really quickly, rather than going back and forth with emails trying to get things done.
I mean, to be quite fair, I mean, in a scenario where we're all in lockdown at the moment due to COVID-19, I mean, it really kind of speaks volumes being able to just crack open a document and see what your colleagues are seeing at the same time. I mean, we've got Nick on the session today. I mean, even last week, we were sharing work with each other so that we could resolve issues together. And that just basically makes things so much easier to kind of explain and to work towards a goal. So collaboration, really, really important. Data, ooh. People love data and Visio, and I can understand why. It's a very, very beneficial. So we mentioned earlier that Visio as a desktop application allows you to connect diagrams to data, and this can control things like text, number values, and even visualizations like gauges and colors on a diagram itself. And quite often this is commonly used for things like dashboards. So you might have a wall chart. He got an example here, the Contoso Medical Center. You might come into the medical center. You see this chart on the wall. It's telling you which rooms are available, which doctor you'll see, which room to go to, where it is. People can easily look at that diagram and go, oh, it's just down the corridor and it's the room on the right. So it's just useful to have that. And just jumping back to Rav again, how about sort of your experience at the Law Society? Have they ever kind of connected data to Visio in the past?
Yes, this is going back a few years back now, when there used to be the LCS, which was a contact centre who took in calls for legal consultancies, where they wanted processes created. These were in access databases, and the information was there, and they wanted to transfer this into Visio, so they used to bring this through from Access straight into Visio, vice versa. Also, Excel spreadsheets with the data in. You can then transfer that straight from Excel into a Visio diagram to create the processes. So people are and were using it at that time, and it's really good and really easy way to bring in information, data.
Yeah, the reason why this is probably not new news to you is that effectively the data connectivity in Visio is quite legendary. I mean, it goes back quite a long way. So, you know, with Rav's reference to kind of using it with Access, I mean, this has been sort of going on for years, but it's still incredibly beneficial to hook up your diagrams with your data. And then there's the showcasing of the information. So if we're thinking, I've just created a diagram, it's hugely beneficial, how do we get that in front of people? I mean, what are the options for that? So we could talk about top popular tools like Microsoft Teams. So you could potentially place your diagrams directly into Teams where people can sort of view and chat about the content there. We could also use Visio to get a jump start on automation. So if you're building a workflow in Power Automate, you could actually build the workflow if you're well, not so much the architect, but the business owner. You understand that business process. You could build it in Visio and hand it off to someone who's adept at building the workflow itself. Additionally, integration could also mean that there are gaps in other tools. Like Power BI doesn't offer the opportunity for you to show diagramming, but you could connect it to Visio using the Visio visualizer and bring your diagrams, even interactive diagrams where you can click on parts of the diagram and it changes your data directly into a report. And as we know, all of these tools love to talk to each other. So Excel, Word, PowerPoint, they all benefit from having Visio on the side. So just a little bit, how can I create a Visio diagram? If you're interested in doing this, just bear in mind that your administrator of your Office 365 environment can enable you to use Visio for a period of time for free if you'd like to trial it internally. Additionally, I also mentioned that there are a couple of variants in the way that you can create diagrams. So we're going to focus on creation first. Firstly, web editors. So you might be aware that in Office 365 and sometimes in on-premises SharePoint environments as well, rather than having the applications like Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and Outlook on your computer to interact with emails, documents, spreadsheets, and slides, you can actually edit the content directly through the web browser. This service is very useful for people who travel and may not have the applications directly available on their computers, or people who want to quickly peek at a document maybe without editing it. Visio Online is the web version of Visio. It's really new, it's built from the ground up, it's very slick, and offers you the ability to build professional diagrams directly through the web browser. But as I mentioned, this is quite new. The legacy of Microsoft Visio is particularly desktop applications. So something that you must install on your computer that is available to the person that it's licensed to. So Visio Professional was traditionally bought as an application and installed on a computer. And both of these options both facilitate diagrams. If you're only interested in viewing content, there's a range of different ways that you can do this. There's the free mobile app that you can get from your iOS, Microsoft or Android app store. You could also interact with your data in other means as well. You could get to it through PowerPoint, Word and Excel with the integration that we'll talk about in this seminar today. And you could also publish and share your content through Teams and SharePoint. So there's a range of ways that you can get to your data. And just, Rav, have I missed anything off there?
Yeah, Chris, there's also other ways. Previously you could also, and then previously Visio, you could actually drop it into a PDF. So you could put it into a PDF file, send it out, whereas a few years back, it wasn't great looking when you try and copy and paste it into Word. So people used to try and save as it into a PDF, which is great, and it still visions it, shows it, and displays it. But the really good one that I want to explain today is web application. So you can actually export it straight to the, you can publish it straight to a web. Where would you use it? Well, we're working at the organisation when we were rolling out a project in raising purchase requisitions. We wanted all the staff to know all the different processes they had to go through to make sure a purchase rec's life from start to finish went through to the end, and where it would finish, and how we'd actually invoice out to the suppliers. Now, we wanted to publish it on an internet where procurement had their information and the finance detail. So we looked at this, and automatically you can publish straight to the web, which is great. It's another app. It's there. It's available, and it's free.
And that's just minimal fuss as well. You export your diagrams to a web page format, and then you could just host it, link to it, and it's pretty much ready to go at that point, isn't it?
Yes, agree with that.
Yeah, that is really cool. So we just mentioned that there's the web version and the desktop version, and I did say to you that, yeah, quite often we talk about the desktop applications as the full fat versions of it, as in full fat milk. So if we're talking about the web version of the product, you are missing a few components. I'm not going to get endeavor to kind of break it down really finely, because we've got a little bit on licensing shortly. But as you can see, just taking a quick scan of this, quite a lot of the things that are quite interesting about Visio, like data integration, are only achievable within the desktop application. There's also large ranges of shapes. There's more integration with other applications with the desktop. But if you're just looking to build a diagram and share it with colleagues, then the online tool is certainly a relevant certainly a relevant way to achieve that. So it just depends on your needs, and we'll explore that a little bit more as we go further through the session. Yeah, I mean, Rav, do you have any sort of comments on that in regards to like what kind of departments may favour which tool?
Yeah, in the last organisation I was delivering training there, they had small departments where some staff would only be designing the basic flow processes. They didn't want to pay out a full license, so Visio Online was great for that. Just basic like organisation charts or cross-flow functional charts, swim lane ones, they worked for them and they needed for. Whereas shall we say, the IT department or the project teams, they needed to go full into different types of processes, network infrastructures, and design this. Facilities wanted to use floor mats, road maps, all types of floor layouts, and this they did need to go out and get the Visio desktop. But the great thing was, it gave them what they required. They didn't have to go out and get these designed. They were designing themselves. They didn't have to use Microsoft Word to put this information in. This was all in there.
Excellent. And as we'll talk about with licensing later, I mean, there's so much flexibility in your licensing as well. So you can kind of, it could be a just-in-time tool when you need it. So let's talk a little bit about usage scenarios. So this is kind of going to wake up your senses to the range of functionality that's available in Visio. But we're going to start off with probably the things that you see the most. When someone says to you Visio, I guarantee in your head, ping, you're thinking flowchart. You're thinking of a to B, or, you know, a split end motif where your arrows are kind of going in different directions to try and achieve an outcome. So these kind of flowcharts are very typically used in an organization. For example, maybe when I was working for a university in London, they had UCAS applications. They probably had the biggest Visio diagram I've ever seen, going across A1 sheets of paper that was sellotaped together, this big diagram. They said, here, Chris, here's your copy. I felt like I needed to roll it up and put it in a tube and take it home. It was monstrous, but this actually made things easy because I was responsible for working with them on that process, and they just gave me the Visio diagrams and said, here, this is what we're trying to achieve. They walked me through it bit by bit. I annotated on the paper. It was brilliant. So these flowcharts really help bring clarity to very complex processes like UCAS applications at universities. Cross-functional flowcharts are even more interesting because they offer us the ability to cross jurisdictions. So we might have a situation where a particular review of a product might go through a CAB meeting, it might go through stakeholders, it might need to go to directors, but we can see whose involvement is relevant at each time. It might bounce back into a jurisdiction later on. So I don't know, Rav, anything to add to that one?
Yeah, just the cross-flow functional charts that you're talking about there, they're really useful. From when I have been delivering training, working with project teams, normal users, basic people who don't see Visio charts can sometimes get confused with the processes they've been given. We delivered the Dynamics AX project. I always come back to these AX projects because it's all around financial. Use swim lanes. This really helped because it showed a starter where you are actually beginning to raise a purchase rec. It showed the swim lane for a user then who requests a purchase rec, down to the procurement where it goes for approval for the supplier they're going to use, and where does the process go from there? It then goes into the finance, and then it starts moving to the next swim lane, and it comes back to the user at the end because they've got to accept the goods. So it's given them a really good overview and a clear, precise overview of exactly what's going on.
I think that's important because if you can ever imagine like a complex business process, things will come back around to you in some circumstances, but not others. You might say, your involvement here is done, but if in case these guys reject, look a little bit further down the timeline, notice it comes back to us if they reject. So it's just showing someone like, your major involvement is here, but there's optional involvement later on based on the circumstance. So it's just clarity in regards to those, again, multi-function processes. Thanks for that, Rav. And I'll probably ask for your insights into this one because, wow, org charts are incredibly popular in an organization. They allow us to depict employee relationships and hierarchies. And it just basically means that if we wanted to escalate an incident or request to delegate work, we can see who reports to who. It can also be used to promote available positions within a team. So you might see like a team manager role. It's now available. Who would report to me if I had that role? Who would I report to? And you could also use it to theorize a departmental restructure. So maybe you have an org chart that you have a copy of and you shuffle it around. You might use these diagrams to kind of show stakeholders how the reshuffle would look and who would report to who. And Rav, I mean, I imagine that this has been quite popular in your roles.
Yeah, Chris, this was a massive one. This was org charts is very popular with a load of departments when you go out to deliver training to them, and even support calls. Most of this was because they never used Visio before that. They were always using Word, and Word can really, and I shouldn't say this, but it does mess up org charts when you are going back to change them or build them. People spend hours and hours on them, and when I get a phone call supporting them, I'd have to go back and rebuild it. And then I said, why don't you use Visio? What's Visio? How does it work? And once you start to demo the things you can do Visio, we can create an org chart in an hour and a half, where some people spend a day in it or 2 days working on it, trying to get it right with the colors, the formats. And as you're already aware, you can see that the diagrams in the slide that Chris is showing at the moment, you could put pictures on there just by adding them. Whereas before in Word, you'd have to click and drag, insert an image. You'd be there for days.
And I know that they've got those or almost like word art scenarios, but they are very limited. I mean, I've tried to force them into a format that I want it to kind of adhere to, and it's never been a particularly easy process. Whereas when you crack open Visio and start building an org chart, it's fluent, it's so slick, and you could connect it to data as well and actually have data in a table updated which flows into the org chart as well. So it's incredibly versatile. And maps, another usage scenario for Visio is doing floor plans for ranges of spaces from sites such as construction sites to stores to shop floors. There's just a series of shapes that allow you to depict doorways, corridors, rooms, toilets, as you can see here, elevators, but also things like car parks as well. Just a way is mapping physical space to show how an area can be best prioritized without endeavoring to take too much time to actually work with the physical space and waste money when you can theorize the semantics of the layout. I'm guessing, yeah, go on.
Yeah, just something around the maps and car parks. When going out to deliver training, you go to business parks, and I'm sure some of you are aware that when you go to these business parks, you can have 5 or 6 little mini roundabouts, and you've got to turn into one corner, back to another, and they've given you a postcode that says you're here, and you're stuck somewhere else, and you're in a different site, in an office that you're trying to look for. So some of the experiences we've had when I've had to go out, I've even showed them maps they can create So you can actually create little mini maps that can direct you directly to where you are based in that business park, which is brilliant if you are trying to find areas of location.
Rav, you probably like me. You've probably been sat on a lay-by in one of these business parks, looking at Google Maps, thinking, "Why? There's an entrance. It's goods in. It's not the visitor's entrance. I can't see another road into this place." Sometimes customers, when they say, "Chris, we'll see you on site tomorrow. Here's a mini map," they'll send me a PDF, and it's quite clearly a Visio diagram. But they've just sort of drawn the lines, even lines from like stations and motorways, just simple instructions. I could tap on the PDF, look at it. I know it's over there. I've missed the turn off. That's much clearer. So yeah, that can be hugely beneficial. My background, I mean, is quite entrenched in IT services. So I've kind of known Visio as a very competent network diagramming tool. And although it allows us to like map our network infrastructure, the benefit of that is being able to resolve current incidents. So if we see a service outage between a couple of servers, we can look at the diagram and see where the bottlenecks might be, or where the connections might have failed. Very, very useful for fault resolution. In addition to that, in my background, we've also used it to show server performance. So you can have data connected to the diagrams to show whether the CPUs are being overutilized, or whether there's an IP flatline. So you can see if there's an outage and we can't ping the server. And scalability as well. I mean, if we want to upscale one of our servers, we could have a look at the network. Will the network take the load? Will we need to upgrade our switches? What's the full cost of this? So we can actually cost up our expansion of our IT infrastructure more efficiently by understanding the diagrams. On the left there, you can see some server racks. Where I worked in retail, if I ever went into the server room, there was a series of server racks that did have basic labels, but we couldn't provide an instruction set on every single rack. So what we would typically have is a diagram similar to the Visio one that you see here that was highly labeled to show where consoles were, to show where specific disks are, backups, and so forth. So it just helped you understand the server. So quite regularly, I would go into the server room, and through general learning, I'd kind of work out where everything is. But if there's something that I'd encountered a lot less, like a particular service, I could just go to the diagram, find the right server, find the right rack, and resolve the issues are there. In regards to the IT infrastructure diagrams, Rav, I mean, is there any other benefits there that I've missed?
Well, I think the one of the benefits is it's sustainable if you have in-house technical architects who actually design these themselves.
Right.
They don't have to go to parties, go to external companies to get this design done. Because they're in-house, previously some have probably used their own applications, but with Visio now it's so easy and it's so smooth and professional. And I think some of the technical architects that I've been working with, they've really enjoyed using this, and I think it's a brilliant app that helps them now within Visio, the template.
Yeah, so I do know that there are almost people who will map your architecture from a sort of third-party perspective and do the diagramming for you. But then if you expand that architecture, it's almost an additional cost to go back and ask them to redo that diagram again. So it's more sustainable if you have that opportunity to do it yourself, for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. My neck of the woods, a little bit on workflows. So automating business processes is something that I do quite regularly for organizations, and effectively it's quite often the scenario that we'll get someone to whiteboard the idea, and then it's our responsibility as workflow designers to turn it into something that will actually function. So we use services like Power Automate or SharePoint Designer to draw a workflow diagram and then connect it to the various data sources and tell those sources what to do. In our respect, we can use Visio to kind of reduce the complexity of these diagrams. So rather than whiteboarding it, the workflow business process owner can actually draw a diagram in Visio. Now, you might think, well, you're doubling the work there, but you're really not. From Visio, you can export that workflow design, which is purely theoretical at the moment, and import it into Power Automate or SharePoint Designer and turn that into a functional workflow. So it's not a duplication of work. It actually cuts down on the amount of work that's required for the workflow author from the person that's conceiving the business process. And then, and additionally, there's also timelines as well. So timelines are quite useful for tracking events or long-scale projects. And this is very easy to set up, but the diagram that you can see in front of you is a very, very simple one that I just threw together very quickly. There's actually quite a range of complex timelines to just best suit your business needs. Has there ever been sort of occurrences of timelines in your organization, Rav?
Yeah, when we're working with the L&D team, I used to be part of the team themselves. The consultants wanted to set dates for appraisals, and a lot of people don't like appraisals. Also, managers don't want to see the date times when they've got to appraise their staff and go through their monthly one-to-ones. So what really helped was when we created a timeline, and it displayed their monthly one-to-ones, displayed their 6-month appraisal and when it should happen, but also then the final objective one at the end of the year appraisal, and it would also show you when they should have that feedback in and back out to the managers and get it approved. So it was really useful for a visual. It helped other staff who were actually being appraised, so they knew when they had to be set and ready to have that appraisal each month, and also the 6-month and the 12-month one. It was really with it.
I mean, I always like the mere mention of the word appraisal normally stirs up this panic. You know, when's it going to happen? How long have I got for my appraisal? Just sort of clarifying from those who are involved in the appraisals to those who will be participating in it, and the timelines just kind of simplifies and makes it very straightforward. It kind of reduces the panic around the whole process. So that's a really, really good scenario for timelines. Appraisals, really, really good one there, Rav. There's more though. Of course there's more. We've barely scratched the surface on usage scenarios for Visio, but hopefully we've kind of whet your appetite and kind of given you an idea for how these diagrams can fit into various avenues within your work. So one of the themes of today's training session was how this can benefit frontline workers. Frontline workers are typically people who are kind of at the forefront of a particular business. So there may be people who operate in a factory, construction sites, various offices. They might be people who are forward-facing in a department store. So quite a lot of the tools that Microsoft offer are becoming better and better for frontline workers. So what frontline workers are using technology like Microsoft Teams on the shop floor, interacting with their store managers, reporting spills and other problems directly to the representatives. So assisting frontline workers is something that Visio also can potentially add tremendous value to, because in our 4 scenarios here, we're going to kind of give you insights into real case scenarios that have, where Visio has directly benefited an organization. One of the things that I'd like to start off with is one of my kind of backgrounds, which is retail. So I predominantly worked in retail when I first started my career. And I kind of worked up to sort of working in an IT support desk, and then to IT service delivery. And we often would go out to stores to support them with their technology related requirements. And we hear about how technology is kind of benefiting people on the shop floor all the time. One of the cases that we had, which was quite interesting, is how often the absence of management can cause things to escalate. So if you had a situation where you've got a customer who's slightly dissatisfied with their experience in store, maybe they're not happy with a product, they kind of storm back in and, you know, this is a problem, I want a refund. Now, you know, we would always expect a member of senior management to be available, you know, in customer services, but they get pulled away, and sometimes you're left with a trainee who's sort of taking this on the chin, listening to this particular incident. So one of the things that we always say to people is, you know, your basic training is, if this happens, you follow this procedure. You need to ask them this, you need to ask them this, you need to be clear about this, what are your options? So in the respect of a customer who's unhappy with a product, first question, you know, do you have a receipt? Yes or no. If you don't have a receipt, I'm sorry, but you'll have to create, you have to show us some proof that you purchased this on your account. Can you show us your online banking? Can you show us, you know, that you've purchased this particular product? And those kind of processes kind of enact. Now, you know, in the midst of a moment, you know, a trainee can panic and, you know, say the wrong thing, the customer could get more upset, or you could make a promise to the customer that's unachievable, and you've deviated from that standard process. So whether it's printed and available behind, in a binder, or whether it's something digitally that's available on a tablet, the trainee can actually walk through the business process calmly and ask the right questions, knowing that that person is correctly following a business process. So on the shop floor, Visio can basically help plot the customer complaint through to a point of conclusion, even in the absence of someone who's more senior, who might eventually be required to approve, the opening of a till for a refund or something like that. But evidently, the trainee is able to handle that situation. So shop floor is a really kind of interesting space for Visio users. Another thing that I've had a bit of experience with is cleaning. So prior to that job, I've worked as a cleaner, and I kind of did this as a kind of a favor to a friend that helped out her cleaning business, and I just sort of tagged along to help out. I always felt a little bit uncomfortable just walking into buildings that I've never seen before, being told, look, there's the cleaning stuff, there's the floors that you need to clean, you need to do surfaces, you shouldn't go in that room, don't go into that meeting room. It's kind of lots and lots of rules. So if you're a cleaning company that has multiple contracts, one of the advantages that you could potentially use is the floor plans in Visio to kind of plot essential information for someone who might be attending site. So you could share the Visio diagrams with the employees. The employees can go into the various floors for the diagrams for that particular office. We can color code areas that they should clean. We can red off the areas that they should stay out of. We could highlight where supplies are. So we could say, look, first of all, the vacuum cleaner's on this floor and this floor. There's not one on the third floor, so you will have to take it up. We could also plot information about points of contact, where security are based, who to contact if we notice a incident on site like a fire. So all of these essential things we can actually build into a diagram to make the life of a cleaner much less stressful if they're to attend a different site on their own. Refining factory processes, one of the advantages that I've had is I've also kind of worked on site with a tobacco industry based in Sweden. And one of the advantages of that is that I got to see their factory floor. Wow, this is absolutely amazing. There's nothing more mesmerizing than going on a factory tour. It's brilliant. And one of the things that he was showing me is, every one of these big machines has like a console on it. And he was saying this one takes photos of the products. If it detects a fault in the product, it disposes it. And that goes into a table that says how many of the products have been disposed of versus how many have gone through production. What's the efficiency of the production? How many have we done per minute? And has there been any incidents? One of the things is that these tables are not very interpretable by ourselves. If we were to look at rows and rows of data, we very much can't glean information into that data isn't tidied up. And one of the things is we could create charts and graphs, but if we connect that data to a Visio diagram, not only can we plot the production line in the factory using shapes, but we can then also imprint live statistics of various things like the amount of items created per minute, amounts of incidents per day. We could even color code and flag up in red particular instruments that have gone wrong, so that quite quickly we can look at the floor plan, identify the fault, visualize where it is in the factory and go directly to that machine, even if you don't really have a great understanding of the layout of the factory. So Visio can very much complement a factory process by using that data integration that we talked about earlier. The last thing that I want to mention in regards to assisting frontline workers is clarifying construction timelines, probably one of the most complex processes that I've seen. When you're working on a construction site, although there's a ton of rules and regulations, we've got to also remember that this is a dynamic site that is changing all the time. Entrances might move, buildings may come and go, and making sure that people are aware of a timeline of which certain people, whether they be contracted in, there's a variety of contractors, when is their involvement, when will they be on site, when will certain features be there and not be there. So quite often, these processes have been very difficultly plotted with other software, but in one case study, since the introduction of Visio, a lot of the process timelines for construction sites have been refined using Microsoft Visio. Quite often the diagrams themselves are printed onto large sheets of paper and pinned into one of the major cabins that's on site, so that people can go into the cabin room, review the process, pinpoint where they are. They might even highlight with pen certain areas of the diagram to have a better understanding of the timelines associated with the construction site. So there's 4 examples there that really show you how Visio can assist those frontline workers with the functionality that's available in the product. So the next thing that we'll talk about is licensing Visio. Now, we don't want to get too ingrained in the semantics of licensing because this information is readily available on Microsoft source sites. So if you want to look at licensing for Visio, it's very easy to search for, but let's just give you a quick overview just so that you're familiar with it. So Visio isn't typically available for free. There are viewers for the product that are free, but to actually be able to amend and create diagrams, you need a license for Visio. So if we're talking about per user per month, if you'd like to just use the online tool, which as Rav has mentioned, has been really, really good for some key workers that need to build diagrams but don't necessarily need the data integration. Visio Plan 1 is £3.80 per user per month. If we're looking at Visio Plan 2, which is £11.30 per month, that's the one that includes the desktop application. So if you are interested towards the end of this session around the additional applications, so we talk about the data visualizer for Excel. If you're interested in the export options to Word and PowerPoint, if you're interested in Power BI connectivity, you definitely want to be looking at Plan 2 for that desktop application. Just to make it clear, the Plan 2 also includes everything from Plan 1, so that includes the online version of the tool. So if you're an Office 365 subscriber, you can either get just the online tool or the online tool and the desktop application. If you aren't using Office 365, there's the scenario where you might want to basically use the standalone applications. So like very traditional standpoint, back in the day, if we wanted a piece of software, we'd install it on our computer. That's the kind of origins that we have for Visio, and there's 2 variations of the product, Visio Professional and Visio Standard. The Visio Professional application has everything that Standard has, but it also allows data diagrams to link to live data. So as we said, an example of live data might be an office floor plan that's linked with maybe a personnel data such as an org chart or for a seating plan. So you could have a look at the floor plan of the office. It will tell you where people are seated in relation to the office spacings. So just to keep it simple, as I mentioned, if you're working to specific industry standards, then the professional application is more relevant to you. If you want to work with data, the professional application is more relevant. But if you just want an extensive selection of functionality, the standard edition will work absolutely fine for you. Just to bear in mind though, there is a difference between the application that you get with Visio Plan 2 and Visio Professional. Let me kind of explain that with this pop-up. So finally, there is a cloud-only feature set. So things like the Visio Visual in Power BI, the data visualizer through Excel, or the database reverse engineering, and also enhanced AutoCAD functionality and an extensive selection of further templates, stencils, and shapes are only available in Plan 2. Plus, Plan 2 allows an installation on up to 5 devices, whereas the standard and professional Visio applications can only be licensed for a single PC. So again, probably the best package for you if you're looking for the complete Visio experience is Plan 2. Plan 2 is what we've allocated to you during the training session as well, in case you are interested in fully exploring the capabilities of Visio. Just to let you know, if you wanted people to be able to consume your diagrams, Rav mentioned that you can export them as web pages and PDFs, but there's also the ability to interact with them, which can come from the Visio diagrams. So if you get the apps that come from the App Store, those can be really useful. So you may have noticed that if you search for Microsoft in your App Store, Visio is one of the apps that turn up. I've got it on my phone and I just use it to look through diagrams. So we mentioned a few key workers on the forefront of shops and factories and so forth. They could use this app on a tablet which has those hard cases around them that they can sort of look at the diagrams on as they're moving around. So we've talked about licensing. The next thing that we're going to talk about is probably the big piece before we kind of give you a little bit of hands-on experience, which is discovering Visio Online. So we mentioned that Visio Online is the web-based version of the tool, and what we're going to do is we're going to just take you through a demonstration where we're going to basically get started by choosing an existing template. So we'll start with a diagram. We'll show you how to expand the number of shapes that you can include in your palette of shapes. And then we'll talk about using connectors, which is a breeze in Visio Online to bring your shapes together. We're also going to say, if someone gives you a bit of feedback and says, you know what, this would look better if you changed this and that, we're going to show you how to quickly switch diagram layout so that you can change your diagram very quickly without having to move everything manually. We're also going to show you, Rav's going to jump in on this demonstration. I'm going to move my document over to a SharePoint site so that Rav can collaborate on it with me. So let's have a look at how that might work. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up my web browser. I'm currently on office.com, and you'll notice that Visio appears on my homepage because I regularly access it. However, I could also go to my app launcher, and you'll notice Visio's here. If you don't see Visio there, you can go to All Apps, scroll down, and you'll notice that Visio is here. Now, if you, again, like I said, want to access the desktop application, it's traditionally installed on your computer. If you don't have it installed, just a quick tip, you can use the web version. If you want to install the desktop application, you've got your option here to install Office, and you've got this other install options. So when you go to other install options, just as a quick note, you've got this option down here called Apps and Devices. And then here's where you can see Visio and install Visio, and you can choose the software version, whether it's 32 or 64-bit. So if you're looking to install the desktop application, that becomes available after you've been licensed to use Visio Plan 2. Otherwise, it will be absent. So that's where you can get the application from. But we're going to focus on the web version. So let's click on Visio here. It's going to then generate on the screen for us a variation of recent documents that I've been working on. And further down, it's also going to show me popular diagrams that I could start to use. There's quite an extensive selection of diagrams, and you can kind of zoom through them and see even more. But for now, let's choose a basic flowchart to keep things simple. All I do is click Create on a diagram, and it gives me the stencil selection or shapes, which they've more recently been known to be called, which are available in my palette, which is the section on the left side of the screen. Now, the palette shapes that you have available are based on the diagram that you previously selected, but that does not necessarily limit you to that selection. Note on the left here that there's a little plus option that gives me the opportunity to specify additional shapes that I'll bring in. I like to sometimes utilize icons as well as other shapes as well. So if I choose Add Shapes, we'll notice that we've got actually quite a good selection of different shapes that we can bring in. However, let's focus on some of the easy ones, like symbols and basic shapes. Adding these in will add your shapes to the left-hand side of the palette, which I can then select and use. Now that we've got a more extensive selection of shapes to use for our diagram, let's talk about building a diagram. My idea for this diagram is from top to bottom. I think of a business process from top to bottom normally. It's just a tradition for me. Now, although I've got a means to start and end the business process, maybe I haven't paid attention and I'm just going to use a process shape to begin my business process. Now, when I collaborate with Rav later, Rav might spot this and say, you know what, Chris has used a different shape here. He should use a start-end piece, so he'll correct that later. But for now, we'll keep going. So we might start our business process, and let's say that this is for reviewing a manual. So we might say submit manual for review. And let's zoom in a little bit there so we can see what's going on. So we've got our shape, we just dropped it in. Shapes can be kind of resized if we need to, so you can make them sort of bigger and smaller to suit the space required. Now, I want to quickly build this diagram. I don't want to spend all day on it. So one of the things that I find quite useful is when you hover your mouse cursor over a shape, you get these directional arrows that allow you to connect to another shape. So you can instantly pick common shapes from the flowchart shapes that we have here and build the connector at the same time. Let's have a choice. So we need a decision to be made about the review for the manual. So the manual submitted for the review, was the review successful? If the review wasn't successful, we might actually kind of go back and say to the person, look, sorry, the manual was not approved. So we might kind of put another shape in. Now again, I'm dragging these shapes in, but I could make that a bit quicker and pop them in like that. So it's a little bit faster to use those grey arrows rather than to actually drag shapes in. So successful. So we might say move to next phase, and this one might be return to author. Now I missed the mark on this one, and I might have a few additional shapes that sort of pop in below. So how do I kind of link all of this up if I have more than one shape? Well, the great thing is that when you place your mouse cursor over a shape without clicking, you get these green circles, and you can click and drag these onto connection points. So you can kind of anchor these onto other shapes very easily. And it just makes your kind of business process a breeze. The other thing just to bear in mind is that you can sort of change the anchor points as well. So you can kind of move them up and down based on how you want them to connect up. But normally Visio picks the best kind of trajectory for that arrow. Now, you know, I said I kind of like top to bottom diagrams, but someone might say to me, oh, actually, Chris, I think that this would flow better from left to right, or, you know, they might sort of say, you know, I envisaged this diagram to look a little different. So one of the things that I've got is I can go to the Design tab and quickly change the diagram layout. Now, before you do, you can change your page orientation from portrait to landscape. So if I change this to landscape, I might want something that kind of sits landscape because I envisage it kind of sitting across the page now. So you can change your page orientation, and then you can think about your diagram layout. So you might be happy with your layout, but you might have had feedback from colleagues that that needs changing. So one of the things I can do is I can kind of quickly change the orientation from left to right. As you can see, some of the lines are crossed, so it kind of doesn't always kind of perfectly plot, so I might have to move things around, but it's quite easy to just kind of move bits around. And then we've also got this compact tree. So the compact tree tries to kind of reduce the diagram down into a logical format that might flow downwards with a different architecture or left to right. So I can quickly make changes as I'm going along. Because this is the online version of the tool, we can rename the file right at the top. So I might call this business process C. And note that this is actually saving directly to my OneDrive. So all of the content that you create in the web version of OneDrive saves directly to, the web version of Visio Online saves directly to your Outlook. Interesting that. So even though this is saved, I might want my colleague Rav to work on this with me. Now, when content's placed in your OneDrive is a personal file storage that typically only you would have access to, but you can share content in your OneDrive with other people. What I would do is I'd click Share at the top right-hand corner of the screen, and then change the share settings to allow Rav to get access. So I click on the banner, choose Specific People, Apply, and then type in Rav's name here. That will send an invitation off to Rav, and he'll be able to work on this with me. But actually, I kind of feel like I want to move this over to a more productive space. So I want to move this over to SharePoint. Rav already has access to that location. So over here in Global Operations, I've got our documents, and we've got a few Visio diagrams that Rav and I are collaborating on right now. I want to move this diagram over as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this tab and navigate across to my OneDrive. We should be able to spot our diagram fairly easily. There it is. I'm going to right click and choose to move that to another location. We're going to go to Browse, and then we're going to choose the Global Operations area, and we're going to drop it straight into Global Operations. So I'm going to move that over. We give that a few seconds. It's disappeared. If we go across to Global Operations, let's have a look over here. Give it a quick refresh. There's Business Process C. Now, Rav already has access to this SharePoint site in Global Operations, so what we can both do is we can jump onto Business Process C and have a look at what's going on. Traditional with most documents that open in SharePoint, or it's going to open up in a view mode, so we can quickly review this diagram, but I want to use my Visio license to edit the diagram. So I'm going to edit in the browser. and then that's going to sort of highlight the content for me. So I don't know if I made Rav's job sort of easier or worse by choosing this particular layout, probably a bit worse. So Rav might have a few comments to say. Rav might say, this is too complicated, can we make this simpler? He might want to change some of the shapes. So you can see up here that Rav selected the first shape in this diagram, has highlighted it in red. He might go, you know what, this really shouldn't be a process shape. This should be a start-end shape. So Rav might actually, you know, tear that out and replace it with something a little bit more logical. So again, these sort of connectors are reformatted, and he can just sort of drop that other connector back in and move it around. He can remove the existing connectors and join them back together. It's still highlighting where Rav's working as well, which is quite interesting. So as he's moving the content around, the connectors, the shapes are all being highlighted. I might kind of also just point out that we've got this comments button at the top right of the screen, and that opens up the comments pane. So I might kind of highlight this shape here, and I gotta kind of say, you know, Rav, the return to author shape is a bit confusing. And I'll post that for Rav. So you'll notice that the comment is associated with the selected shape. So Rav could click on that and see what the comments are. Now, I quite like Teams, so I'd actually probably be on a call with Rav as we were working on this together so that we could both be up to speed on what's going on. Cool. So Rav's just replied to my comment. He's just saying he'll go through the process now and then agree on changes, so then we'll speak later. Great thing about co-authoring is it's saving as we go. I could just leave this document and leave Rav in it. So Rav seems to got he's on top of this. So I'm going to actually leave the document now. So I'm just going to close the tab because it's auto saving. Don't have to click save. I'll just come back out, and you'll notice that it's saying a few seconds ago Rav's working on this file. So it's got keeping track that Rav's still authoring it. So thanks very much for that, Rav. So we've had a look at a little bit about co-authoring there. Okay, so welcome back. We're just come off our break, and we're just going to talk about the Visio Data Visualizer for Excel. If you want to use this, this is actually free, but you need to be able to plug add-ins into Microsoft Excel. So if your administrators have disabled you from using add-ins for Microsoft Office applications, that might limit you here, but otherwise this is a completely free tool to use. And what I mean by free is that this tool allows you to use a table to build a Visio diagram. And you don't necessarily need Visio to be able to do that. You don't need a Visio license. But we'll explain the nuances around that. But let's get you excited for what this actually is. So the Visio Data Visualizer, it basically gives you the opportunity to have data in an Excel table that derives the shapes and connectors in a Visio diagram. And this allows you to synchronize changes both ways. For example, you may be in a situation where people prefer to update a table of information about an org chart. So if someone's added in, they add a row of data and that updates the org chart. So we could update the table which controls the diagram. Or we might need to have a diagram that connects to a table so that when we start amending the diagram, it changes the table in the back end. Great news is that they're both interconnected. There are two ways to get started. I'm going to show you both. You can start from Excel or you can start from the Visio application. Let's kick off by starting from Excel, which is certainly probably the easiest way to kick this off. So I'm going to quickly open up the Microsoft Excel application on my computer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with a blank workbook, nothing special here. But what I'm going to introduce you to is in the Insert tab just at the top of the screen here, we're going to zoom in and you'll notice that we've got this option called Get Add-ins. So that allows you to go to the Microsoft Store and get some add-ins. Now, just because it's a storefront doesn't necessarily mean that there are costs associated with all these tools. For example, you go to Microsoft Add-ins and search for Visio. you'll notice that the Visio tool is something that you could just quickly add into your Excel application. So you just click Add, and then it adds it into your spreadsheet. Now, once you've got the add-in, you can just click on My Add-ins and then select the Visio Data Visualizer. So as I mentioned, it will kind of ask you to sign in at this point. Because I have a Visio license, I can actually edit the Visio diagram. If you don't have a Visio license, you can still use this service, but you can't actually go into the diagram to change it. You can only manipulate the diagram through the Excel spreadsheet. So I choose sign in. Give that a few seconds. And then you need to choose the type of diagram that you wish to generate. So there's a few cross-functional ones. So you've got org charts, but all of those could be quite useful. I'm going to go for a vertical cross-functional flowchart. So this is going to have the swim lanes vertically, which is an interesting look for a flowchart. And we'll get our preview here. So like I say, it's just generating the diagram at this point, and it's based on this table. Now this is all substitute data, so as you can imagine, what you would then go and do is you'd control the aesthetics of the diagram by manipulating the data in the table. So as an example here, we might decide that, you know, we need an additional process here. So effectively, once we've published our course, you may notice that although sort of row P500, which is the ID of each one of these shapes, so P100 to 500, the final shape is actually this published course one, which is here, and it doesn't link to any further shapes. So what I want to do is I want to create another shape here that links to the course published, and that's to review analytics around the course publication. So I'm going to create row P600. And that could actually, this ID could just be 1, 2, 3, 4, as long as we can reference the same IDs over here. So it doesn't matter that it's P100, it could be 1, 2, 3. I've created P600, and I'm going to call this Review Analytics. So if we're publishing a course, once it's been out there for a while, the last part of the process might be to review how successful the course is. Now, we'll notice that this shape could link to another shape, but it's not going to link to another shape. It's the last thing we do. But we do want to link P400, which is published course, which is this shape here. We want to link that to our new shape called Review Analytics. So what we do is we just type in the name of the row that we want to link to, P600. And that draws a connector between that. Now those connectors can have labels. So you'll notice here where we've got module passes review, we've got yes, comma, no. So that just labels the diagram yes and no. And because we've got two values, it splits the branches. So if you want to do a split branch off a shape, you can do that. You can also choose the type of shape that you're using. So what you'll notice here is if I click into here, you get a drop down and you can choose from different types of shapes. Now, I'm quite interested in maybe duplicating this shape here, which is process. So we can do that there. And it's going to go under the reviewers section. So maybe our reviewers do this. And then if I click refresh, we should get an update to our diagram. I think that's pretty cool. So I don't know. This could be improved. I don't know, Rav. Have you got any ways that we can sort of make this better?
There, Chris. Sorry, I thought I'd wait for you to speak and then I'll come in. And what it is I wanted, let's say, another column for publishers, for example. So it's there as a swim lane, for example.
Yeah.
Or, you know, so what would we do there to add that in?
That's a good point. So Rav's just saying sort of like, you know, it's auto-generated 3 swim lanes. Now, again, we would probably choose what our swim lanes are titled by manipulating the function data. But you may notice that we've got 1, 2, 3 swim lanes that have been declared here. So if I wanted a new swim lane, I just need to choose which shapes would appear in which swim lane. So what I'd do, Rav, is I'd just change this. So we might have... you were saying sort of publishers or, you know...
yeah, a publisher want anything.
Yeah.
If you're going to publish, we want to have it proved for some reason, so we may put another process there, say proved
Yeah, because
Seems
you know,
sort
another team might take responsibility for that particular task. So yeah, if we
yeah.
just manipulate the function column, we just get that additional swim lane. So I mean, that's quite useful. So what Rav's kind of getting into there is that you know we're using a table to build the diagram. So the Visio data visualizer in Excel is allowing us to interact with this diagram. Now, if you decide, you know, you want to change more about the diagram, that those with a Visio license can click Edit, and that will open it up in the application that's associated with this. So let me just double check that. Yeah, I thought it might do that. It's just opened up that diagram, and I can potentially make changes to it here. I'm just going to close that though. Now, one thing I just want to highlight is where this data is. So I mentioned that normally when you generated Visio diagram, it goes into your OneDrive. And this Excel file hasn't been saved yet, which you can see it's kind of complaining about. So let's say that I saved this in OneDrive as well, because it's saying this Excel workbook must be saved. Now, imagine that this is both saved in OneDrive. The diagram saved in OneDrive by default, the Excel document saved locally in OneDrive as well. I decide that actually Rav and I myself need to collaborate on this. So I might decide actually I don't want this in OneDrive anymore, and I might move it to SharePoint or Teams. Now, as you can expect, two separate files that are linked to each other might get a little bit upset if you move them around. So let me explain what would happen. If you move the Excel file to a different location, the most it will get you to do is sign back in to the data visualizer component of your workbook. So that's quite an easy resolution. It becomes more difficult, however, if you move the diagram. If you move the diagram, you'll get an error in your visualizer saying that it can no longer source the content. What you'd need to do at that point is open up the diagram in the desktop application, and then from there, you'd simply use the option relink data source. So there's a data tab, there's a button called relink data source, and you can reconnect that connection again. So again, I wouldn't recommend shifting them around. So you might say, well, Chris, it's put them in that location, it's put that diagram into OneDrive, what if I don't want it to happen that way? The alternative is to do this. Rather than doing it from Excel, you could do it from Visio and connect to your Excel spreadsheet. So in an example, I might have some files. And let's say we've got demo C here. So in this table, you can see that I've already sort of used data that's pre-established. So we've got the same things. We've got the IDs, which step the IDs go to, the name of the process ID. And then as we go across, we've got our shape types, our connector labels. We've even got the opportunity to add data to our shapes, and we'll explain that a little bit more later. So in that respect, if I connected to this, it will be able to draw a diagram off the back of that table. So you could build any table you want. As long as it's got the sort of this structure, you can progress with that. So how do I do that from Visio? So you'll need the Visio application for this particular demonstration. Let me just double check a couple of things. Yep, bring this across for us. So you'll notice that some of the diagrams that I've highlighted as new here include the data visualizer diagram. You can actually search for this particular category. If you go to New and search for Data Visualizer, it will find a selection of templates that you can use to pull a spreadsheet in and use that as your design. Now, if you want to try this at home, one quick tip I've got for you, if you click on the maybe cross-functional or standard flowchart, when you select this, you've got the opportunity to see Excel data template. Now, the data that you saw me open earlier, demo C, that is that data. So all I've done is, for this demonstration, I've borrowed that template. So that's one of Microsoft's templates that you can use as a sample to try and work out what you want to achieve. From there, choose Create. Now, what it's going to do, it's going to say, Chris, where is your workbook? And that workbook is kind of at the moment in SharePoint. Now, I've got a little shortcut here. So I've actually synchronized this to my file explorer from SharePoint using the sync tool. And I'm just going to quickly select demo C. So that's the spreadsheet we opened. Now what it will do is it will look for a table, and then we're going to choose Finish. And what it's done, if I just close the data graphic fields pane, you see that it's built that diagram in. Let's prove that it goes back the other way. So as we can recall, there are two components to this. There is the diagram and the data source. If the data source changes, we can refresh the diagram. If the diagram updates, we can refresh the data source. Now we've seen what happens when we update the table. We've seen the diagram change based on the table changing. What about vice versa? What if we change the diagram? Does that update the table? Well, let's see if that works. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull out one of these values and just give myself a bit of space, and I'm going to drag a new shape in. So I'm going to have another process here. I'm going to call this the final review and click off that. So just a couple of connectors being added either side automatically because I dropped it in between a connector, so that's slick. It's also added a new shape. Now, if we select our diagram and go to design, my apologies, we've got the option to update the data source. Now you might get an error here. If you get an error, just check to see if you haven't got the data source open. If you have Excel open, you might get an error. So just close the data source and try it again. Once that's been done, you should be able to go back to our document. I'm not sure I'm particularly happy about that sync status error there, but let me cross my fingers and hope that that's worked. Yes, we do. We do have the final review row there. So it has added my row in. So the data is synchronized both ways in that effect. The sync error is now gone and it's now working okay. Well, that was lucky. So just a couple of tips around that. I'm just going to close this. Actually, let's just leave it open for now. We can use this in the next demonstration. Actually, I will just close that for now. So just as a quick recap, in regards to the data visualizer for Excel, if you don't have a Visio license and you want to kind of include that diagram in your Excel workbook, then you could use that data visualizer add-in. But if you want to actually work on the diagram, then you will need that Visio license associated with it. But it's certainly a great tool for those who want to keep things quite contained. Having a lot of chefs, too many chefs spoil the broth scenario. If you have lots of people fiddling around with an org chart or a complex process, people can kind of make a mess of it. Whereas if we connect it to a spreadsheet and say, look, this is the format we work with for this particular diagram, it can keep things more orderly. So if you're an Excel user, that's quite an exciting component to consider. If you are a Microsoft Office user, you might also be quite excited that the ways that you can show off your Visio diagrams and document your Visio diagrams in front of stakeholders and investors. We're going to talk about using Visio with Word and PowerPoint. So effectively, there's a few things that I kind of want to show to you here, and we're going to focus on Microsoft Word first. So if you're a Visio user, you may need to document your diagram. So the diagram itself should be fairly intuitive, but you can't scribble essays over your diagram to try and explain to people what each process will do. So one thing that we're going to kind of focus on here is that you can generate a fantastic document off the back of your diagram. A little example of that, I'm just going to kind of go into this diagram here. So you might notice that this is the diagram that we were looking at earlier that was generated in Excel, but I've just kind of given it a heading, but not too much work done on that. Zoom in a little bit more just so you guys can see a little more clearly. So at this point, I've been told by my line manager that not only should I have kind of built the process for our course publication review, but I need to now document it. Now, documentation normally would mean that I'd have to, take screenshots of the diagram, put it into a Word document, and then highlight the properties and information around each shape. Sounds like a lot of work. So one of the advantages I've got is they can either go to the File tab, Export, and choose Create Word Document. Or if we go back, we could choose the option Process and then Word as a shortcut. Watch what happens. Choose Microsoft Word as my export option. And what it does is it kind of shows you how it's going to break down the diagram. So it takes the whole diagram to begin with as an overview, breaks down the swim lanes in this particular example, shows various process journeys. And if I choose export, let's have a look at the data. That's looking pretty cool. So it's already formatted in quite a pleasant way. If I scroll down, I can start to see it's got a little bit of information about the org chart when it was created, who the author was. And then as I scroll down, it breaks down the swim lanes, shows the process, breaks down the process. That's pretty useful. So that auto generation has been quite nice.
Chris, can I mention something there?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, what it is I know you've done the export and all the diagrams have been put in, which are great. I know some places where I've actually trained this, and especially project teams, they want their process to show maybe start and finish dates and costings for that actual process boxes. So they could be also added, and when you produce the report, it will display that information in a box and all the data that's related to it. So it's really great to view when you're viewing it on a Word document, and it actually shows you the cost, if there is any costs related to that process, and the start and finish dates, and who's the owner of it, for example.
Oh, I see. So you'd basically document that at different stages using the shapes, and then that comes over to the Word document. Okay.
It does. So
what's the process for that?
Okay, the process for that and how to do it, you go to the tab called View.
Okay. Yep.
And in the group called Show, there's an actual command called
Task panes. Okay. And then
shape data.
Okay, shape data. So that brings up our panel. So I've got no shape data, so I need to select a shape. So let's go for create course module. So I see, so we've got the cost, the owner, start the end date. Yeah, so yeah, using your example, Rav, maybe we'll say the cost for each module might verge on about 200 quid. Process number might be 789. The owner is myself. And we might say, you know, we expect that should start Monday of next week and transit maybe over to Friday. The status, we could say that's in progress. So almost you're documenting it like a cost of the task here. So you're saying that if we kind of come out of that, so we can always pin or hide that pane. If we come out and publish that again, so we go to Process, Word, Export. So if I search for, let's try and find 789.
789.
Ah, yes. So that's just basically helping me document it. So if I was the diagram designer, the more information I put in about the shapes, the more it completes it in the Word document in the back end. That's a really good tip, Brad. Thanks for that. So whilst we have this diagram open, actually, another thing that I kind of wanted to talk about was how PowerPoint can help you explain your model. So it's taken a little bit of time for me to put a diagram together, and I want people to find it clearer than legacy processes that we had mapped in other applications like Word. So people have always said it's really difficult. I'm scrolling through a document to try and explain the process. They're saying, no, this needs to be a bit slicker. So although my business process, I understand it, I want people to understand it as well with me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a PowerPoint presentation using what we call snippets. So commonly what people will do is they'll copy and paste bits of their diagram into PowerPoint, but that can kind of create a very disjointed experience, or they'll put the whole diagram in the PowerPoint presentation and people will just be none the better. So what we would recommend at that point, if you're trying to professionally show your diagram off in a presentation, is to go to the View tab and choose Slide Snippets. So slide snippets is a pane that you can activate. And once you've created a side snippet, in this case, an area that you want to include in a slide, I'm going to just drag this across here. And I'm going to make it a bit wider, so, sorry, a little bit taller. And then I'm going to kind of shrink this down. So phase one that I want to explain in my slide deck is going to include the involvement of the project managers and the writers, which I call phase one. So I'm just retitling that snippet there. Now, the next thing I want to do is talk about the relationship between the writers and the reviewers. So I might, in my presentation, have that as a separate slide. So I'm going to just drag this shape on and cover this area. I'm going to call this phase two. And lastly, we've got our relationship between the reviewers and the publishers. So I'm going to add one final little snippet here, chuck it over that side, and just change the size of that. Of course, you know, I'm doing columns. You might zoom in on particular elements. You may go smaller, you may go bigger. Absolutely fine. What I want to show you is if I just call this phase 3, that it's going to take these snippets and do a wondrous job with them. Because if I export this to PowerPoint, one, it kind of looks like it's guillotined the process up. But watch what happens. Because PowerPoint has these transitions. My mouse sometimes does this. My apologies. It disappears off and now it's back. The morph animation will animate the difference between the slides. So although this is just a cropped image of the whole diagram, watch what happens when we hit play. So notice here that this is phase 1. This is the bit that I selected. But watch this. As I click, it's going to animate the difference between those sections. And now I can sort of go back and forth and kind of explain between these areas what's going on. I can go on to the last section and then, you know, my presentation's done. So for particularly large diagrams, that can be really useful, a more fluent way of taking people through that journey with you. Okay, and you might do that a few times. You might have one journey that takes you one way and another journey that takes you through another way. Rather than having these big diagrams and trying to point to them, you can make it more sublime, more simple by putting it in this format. So again, a little bit of integration could go a long way with these applications. So thanks, Ralph, for the shape data tip there. That was really useful. So hopefully there's been some really cool points to kind of think about if you're at the point where you want to sort of show off your presentation. Our last section in this webinar is going to cover Visio and the Power Platform. If you're unfamiliar with the Power Platform, these are a series of solutions that allow you to build experiences for your people within your organization, outside your organization, which may be reports, it may be an automated process, it may be an app. So there's a variety of services that Microsoft provide, and we're just going to kind of enlighten you of the Power Platform and then show you how Visio can make the Power Platform even better. So if we're talking about the Power Platform, they consist presently of 4 solution builders. Power Apps is a solution builder that allows you to build applications. These are interfaces that people can use to create data, edit data, view data in multiple formats. So you can design an app that could be consumed from a laptop or computer, but also be published to a mobile phone or a tablet. So the whole idea behind Power Apps is bringing services to people on different devices. There's also Power BI, BI standing for Business Intelligence, offering you the opportunity to take complex data sources and amalgamate them and turn them into insights. So you're generating reports to let people take corrective action in a timely manner on elements that are coming up in the business. Power Automate gives us the opportunity in the Power Platform to automate business process. We sometimes call these workflows, where you're automating a business process from start to finish. Something like a holiday request could be received, approved, and communicated back to the requestee automatically without requiring any paperwork whatsoever. Power Virtual Agents is also a facility which allows you to create bots that appear on websites to allow people to ask questions without having to consume someone's time. So quite often on a website you might see Ask Us a Question. You click on it and a little chat box comes up. Now, normally an agent will sit behind that. So an agent will see your request and they'll type in a response and send it back to you via the chat. Now, quite often these agents are inundated by lots of generic questions. So, what time do you open? What time do you close? Are you open on Sundays? These questions could be soaked up by a bot. So the bot could say, we're open Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. And respond to that. Eventually, if the person has exhausted what the bot can do, the bot can suggest to them that they speak to a real agent, and then the request is passed over to an actual person. So it's really cool that a variety of really useful services are all wrapped up into this Power Platform banner. The thing I'm most excited about is to show you how Visio can actually benefit people who are in these spaces. Let's talk about something that I'm quite familiar with, which is building business processes. Quite often when I'm consulted into organizations to design business processes with them, it's interesting to kind of see what approaches people have. There's always a scenario where there's the people who know the process and there's the people who know the systems and can build the process in an automatic fashion. It's very rare that they're the same people. We always try and educate people so that they can do both. But in reality, quite a lot of people, when they hire a consultant to automate a business process, they're doing that because they don't know how to do it themselves. So quite often it's whiteboarded. They'll scribble on a whiteboard, this task goes to this person, it's approved, it goes to that person, and so on and so forth. Then it's the responsibility to take that idea and then build it into a workflow. And a lot of toing and froing happens between the workflow designer and the person that understands the business process. We come back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. It could be a long process. What we need to do is bring those two figureheads together, and we could do that using Visio. So what Visio offers us the opportunity to do is to build a business process using a diagram. So rather than them scribbling on the whiteboard, we say, put down the pen, let's just design this in Visio, have a start point and end point, and let's build this together. The exciting thing is that once this diagram's completed, there's the opportunity to publish it to Power Automate, and it takes the design and lays it out into Power Automate for a workflow designer to complete. This greatly reduces the amount of work that the workflow designer needs to do. They can just simply tie the actions into the various systems in the back end. Let me show you how that might work. So we're going to start off by building a new Visio diagram. So I'm going to click File. We're going to go New, and I'm going to pick a template. You notice here I've got a basic starter diagram. This is a new type of template that you can use. If I select that, you can also search for this as well. You can search for diagrams such as a BPMN diagram, also sort of supports this functionality as well. But if I have a look at what's on offer, I could start from scratch. I could potentially try something that's pre-existing. I might go for this one, the purchase order workflow. The main reason for that is that it's mostly built rather than me building it from scratch, so it saves me a bit of time. Again, just note here that if I hover over the first one, it says Microsoft Flow diagram. Bear in mind, Flow is the old name for Power Automate, so you might still see references to Flow, but technically a flow is a workflow that you build in Power Automate, so some of the terminology is correct. So we're going to choose a purchase order workflow and click Create. And what you'll notice on this is it's slightly different from the average diagram. Let's get rid of the snippets pane and zoom in a little bit. So you can see that there are icons. And for those who are familiar with Power Automate, you may recognize some of these icons as services that Power Automate can connect to. When these diagrams are composed, you get an additional option. So if I go to our Process tab, we've got this Show Flow markup for Power Automate. So if I toggle that on and off, it shows that each shape has an association with an application. Because this is a template, they've already got those pre-associations. Any new shape that I add is not associated with a service in Power Automate. So I'll explain how you configure that in a moment. But let's familiarize ourselves with what's going on. This is a purchase order request system. You've probably done purchase order requests within your organization for software or hardware. As you can see here, it says a purchase order request is created. There's a icon for SharePoint here, and that symbolizes that an item is created in a SharePoint list to document a row of data that represents the purchase order request. So someone might complete a form, the data stored in a table in SharePoint. It then sends an approval request out. An approval will respond with either yes or no. If they respond with no, then we update the original record created in SharePoint with rejected. If it's approved, we then retrieve some supplier details from SharePoint. So maybe there's another list in SharePoint that has information about the supplier. If we have a look at the rest of the process, it then will start another approval process that can either be rejected or approved. So as an example, we might say that the parties concerned might need an email to let them know that the process has started and ended. So if I expand this swim lane, make it a bit bigger, we're going to have a task that will appear here. Maybe one that comes in here if it's approved. And then I could change this to email notification. So someone will receive an email if they submit a purchase order, and we want to call this email confirmation. Now, what you'll see here is that actually, you know, I've added that shape. Visio's gone, I'm not sure which service this is relevant to. You know, you might think, can't it interpret that word email there? You might not necessarily want it to work with an email service, even though it says email in it. So what you need to do is, once you've added further shapes, when you choose to export, it's not quite finished. There are going to be issues to resolve, such as one or more shapes not having triggers or actions. So apply the appropriate trigger or action. When I went into this mode, you can refresh and it will kind of highlight, if I close this panel, any shape that does not have an associated workflow action. And then what you do is you sort of double click, and then for those of you who are familiar with Power Automate, it will provide you with an interface for choosing there we go, for choosing the type of action that you want to utilize. So this is going out to Power Automate to find the selection of connectors that we can use to build the bridges between workflow and diagram. And what we want to do is we want to send an email. Okay. We could always search for other things that we might want it to do, but that's actually exactly what I want it to do, send an email. So when I select this service, you'll notice it fills in the blank there. And if I kind of come across to this one as well, I might want to use that same service. And just as a reminder, you can still search. So if I search for mail, we get all of the different services. So I can sort of bring that in there. And then what we should find, if we hit refresh, it's actually happy to export it now. Now, the way that it exports it is very slick. If you used to work with SharePoint Designer in Visio, you had to export it as a file, then import it into SharePoint Designer. Actually, because Power Automate is web-based, it just launches the content directly into Power Automate. So if I choose export here, we give our workflow a name. So you give that a few seconds. So I'm going to call this department PO process, purchase order process. Give that a few seconds. So it's saying create flow. Click that button. Give it a few seconds. So it says your flow was created. You can make changes to it by going to Power Automate or click Done. You will need to make changes to it because it is not configured. It does not know which SharePoint site to go to, which emails, which mailbox to send the task to. So we do need to go to Power Automate. But I just thought I'd show you the process of kind of tagging processes onto shapes before you export. Across in Office 365, we're going to go over to here, and we're going to launch Power Automate. Over in Power Automate, anything that you publish typically will be listed under My Flows, under the tab My Flows. So the tab My Flows are any flows that you created that you haven't shared with someone else. And you can see the department PO processes here, created 52 seconds ago. So I can click on the little edit icon whilst my mouse is hovered over this workflow. And that should launch the workflow designer. Now you'll notice that we're getting red errors here, and that's due to the fact that these mandatory fields require configuring. So I won't be able to save this workflow until I finish configuring it. Now bear in mind that the person that's designed the business process in Visio, they may not be aware of which data source they should be using, which mailbox to send things to. So as the role of the designer of the workflow, I might now need to work with the person that owns the data source in SharePoint to say, I'm going to build my workflow, connect it to your site, connect it to your list, and then we're going to send an email to the person that created the item, and then we're going to start the approval process for the person who's declared for approving the item. So we will need to work with data sources and the workflow quite closely together in this interface before the workflow is ready to roll. But until then, let's just quickly scan through it. So we'll notice that we've got our approval process here. We don't know who our approver is yet. We'll have to configure that. Once the approver has rejected, we set the task as rejected. If they approve, it comes down to the budget approval. If the budget approval is approved, we get that email confirmation we added earlier. If rejected, we say the budget wasn't approved. So everything that we added, the email notification here and here, has appeared in the diagram. So that could be an excellent way of bridging the world between workflow designer and business process owner. So Visio has made Power Automate a much more approachable tool in that respect. I'm just going to close down that workflow, and I'm going to kind of talk about my next topic here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about empowering reports with Visio. Okay, so when you're using Power BI, it's a reporting tool, so you can connect to data sources and then bring that rich data to the surface. Those tables, all of that information can be reorganized into charts, maps, it can be turned into gauges, a variety of exciting ways to interpret this information. However, there's no real way of kind of putting a floor plan that's relevant to your business directly into Power BI, not without the Visio visualization that you can add for free directly to Visio. If you've got diagrams that you'd like to incorporate into a Power BI report, that visualizer is absolutely excellent for doing so. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what I'm going to do in this demonstration before we actually kind of focus too much on how to do it. A lot of this demonstration is pre-built for simplicity. 1 second, let me just check my next slide. So if I just come out of this for a second, and we'll just quickly tidy this up. I'll hide this one. So I'm just going to kind of do a little bit of a scribble on the screen here just to kind of illustrate my point. So 1 second, I'm going to switch on my pens, and let's start off with a nice green color. So I'm just going to kind of explain what I've got. So we've been noticing in our organization a rather alarming sort of discussions around slips, trips and injuries on floor 2. We don't quite understand why this floor has so many problems, but we're trying to identify which areas of that floor more injuries are reported in and which ones are unsafe. At the moment, we have a simple Power App, which basically is an incident logging form. So if someone notices someone who's had an accident, they're required to log it. So what they'll do is they'll go into the app and they'll say, the incident happened here, what was the problem, blah, blah, blah. And there are a few interesting bits of information that we take away from that. So we have a column on which room the incident happened in. We also have a category of rooms. So was it a meeting room? Was it a corridor? Was it a departmental office? So we've got types of rooms. And then we've got one final column for the count of incidents. So how many incidents have happened in that particular room? Now, at the moment, that data has been growing and growing. And one of my challenges as an analyst in the business is to try and kind of create a visual way of interpreting the danger spots on this floor plan. So thankfully, I've got access to Visio. And Visio gives me the opportunity to start to build a diagram. So in Visio, what I've done is I've just basically designed a floor plan. So our floor plan might include like a corridor. It might include like a bank of desks. It might also include a couple of meeting rooms. That looks like a smiley face. It wasn't meant to be. We've got a couple of rooms over here as well. So we might effectively start to say in Visio, right, although we got this floor plan that I've lovingly created, what areas do we have? Well, we have this area with the elevators. We've got this area, which is an office. We've got this area. We've got this area. We've got a breakout room. We've got two offices here and here. So in Visio, what I can do is once I've created my diagram, I can overlay on the diagram another layer of shapes that basically say these are areas. With that done, one of the things that I kind of want to do is kind of link the data in these shapes to the rows of data that exist in my table. So I might say here, if we get a purple out, there's a row of data in my table for the kitchen. The kitchen is this room. So I might link that shape with that row of data. And then we just keep going through it. So we might have a situation where we've got another row of data that is relevant to this area here. So we link that square shape to that row of data. Well, what we can do in Visio is we could do some things like conditional formatting, or we could show a number. So we could do a count of the number of incidents to the right-hand side of the room. But I want to bring this excellent diagram into Power BI so that I can actually get people to interact with the map. They can tap on the map and then it will change other diagrams in regards to that. So what you're going to see me do is I'm going to create a Power BI report. And on that Power BI report, we're going to have a chart which is going to kind of show statistically which types of rooms are more dangerous. So whether, corridors are more dangerous or meeting rooms are more dangerous. And then what we're also going to do is we're going to take our diagram from here and pop it in here. And then what's going to happen is we're going to play around with the diagram and choose its colors. We're going to choose its what data it's going to display, and that will inherently link it to other data that we have in our report. So I'm quite excited to show you this, and I just wanted to kind of diagram this in PowerPoint just very briefly before I kind of show you it in the real world. So let's have a look at our contenders. So firstly, let's have a look at that spreadsheet. So this spreadsheet is hosted so that it can be updated. I've got a connection to it. It's actually in SharePoint at the moment, but this is our maintenance incidents. And you can see quite clearly it's very simple data. We've got a room name, a type of room, so elevator 1, 2, 3 and 4 are all types of elevator, meeting room 1, 2, 3 and 4, all types of meeting room. We've got certain rooms that are real hotspots for issues. We've got certain locations that aren't problems at all. So what we want to do is just basically relate that information to our floor plan. So with that data in mind, what I did is I built a floor plan, and it's called floor 2, the scary floor where all the incidents seem to be happening. Opening up this diagram, which also we've placed in SharePoint as well, you'll see that we've got under this layer a office floor plan, and then above that we've got another layer which has these shapes. So we've got these basic shapes. That's all I've done. They've just been overlaid on top of another diagram. Now what you'll notice is we've got connected data. So when we click on the data tab, we've got the option to quick import the data, and that will show us our table in the external data panel to the right hand side. For each row, what you can do is you could select a row and choose the option Link Data, and then you can link it to a specific shape. You'll see that I've already done it for a few references. So I selected Meeting Room 1, chose Link Data, and then selected the meeting room. So this is Meeting Room 1 down here. Meeting Room 2 is situated here, which is more of a breakout room. The scary kitchen with the big number of incidents is here. Lots of sharp knives and hot water, because I can understand that. IT have an alarming number of issues. Maybe they throw paper at each other. And then we've got our finance office here, regional director, and CEO. So that's quite interesting. We've just basically just carved off these different locations. Now, all I've done is I've saved this to SharePoint. So if I go back to my web browser, go into global operations, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of show you this. So I've got my same files that you saw in File Explorer earlier. They're all here. And what you'll see here is the diagram. Now, I don't need to do much more here. My diagram's pretty much ready. It's connected to my data. That's pretty cool. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this web address for where that lives. So just copying that out of the address bar in Edge. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to travel across to Power BI. Now, I'm going to use Power BI Desktop for this demonstration. So that's a free application that you can download and use, but bear in mind that Visio does carry its own licensing. So, sorry, Power BI carries its own licensing. So just be aware of that. I'm going to open up this file, which is a kind of here's one I made earlier scenario. And I'm going to show you what I built, and then I'm going to show you how I built it. So I'm going to have one page of my report that's already kind of preconceived, and then I'm going to kind of show you how the Visio visualizer works. Okay, so we're nearly there. So this is my incident area report, and what you'll see is it's just going to take a few seconds. It's just going to load that in. And what we can see here is that this is the Visio diagram that we mentioned earlier, but the shapes that we've been talking about are filled in with different colors. Also, alongside that, we can also see that we've got an additional visualization in our report. Now, visualizations are different charts and graphs that you can put into Power BI. One of the things that we'll just highlight here is that I've just used a clustered column chart to represent the department types and the number of incidents. Now, you might be wondering how. Well, the way I've achieved that is in this Power BI report, I've connected to that same table. So although that data is feeding my Visio diagram, that data could also feed my Power BI report. So going back to our report designer, that's the table, and these are the columns. Now, how do we, how does this kind of relate to each other? So if I select a particular room, like the break room, you'll notice that the department incidence drops to about 10, or about 11 there. So by department, there's been 199 incidents reported, only 11 of which have happened here. If I click on the kitchen, we can see that actually there's only one kitchen type of room, and that's where all the incidents are happening, so to speak. If I click on the IT department, the IT department's actually 65 of the 199 incidents that have been reported by department. So we can actually click on the different areas of the diagram, and that cross filters the data in the other visualization. This is fantastic, and I didn't really set that up. It just natively does that, which is really cool. So how did this get built? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go across to this demo C section here and introduce the main contender. So visualizations are extensive. There are a range of ways that you can interpret your data as different charts and graphs. If you don't have everything you need, if you click on this ellipsis, you've got the option to import from AppSource, and that's like a marketplace for visualizations. The visual that we're going to use in this demonstration, the Visio visualizer, is in the AppSource. So when you click on the ellipsis and click the AppSource, it will open up a marketplace. You can search for Visio, and then add that directly to your report. Now, you don't have to pay to add that to your report, but bear in mind that that will only be added to this particular report. If you create another report separate to this one and you want to use this visualization, you'd then have to add it once more. That will place it into your area here. I might get a message to say it's already been added, being told off by the system. But if you've already got it, you can select it from here. So, yeah. You've already got a copy of this visual, do you want to update it? So if there's been a change to it, I could update it here, but I know I've added that very recently, so I'll just close that message. Click on the visualization, it will place it onto your report page and use the corners to expand it to the size that you wish it to be. The next thing that you might want to do is just be aware that you need to have the visualization selected. You may notice that the options here are quite limited. It's because I've deselected it. If I select it again, these are the options I need to complete. For the visualization to work, I need to specify the IDs of the items that I want to use in my report, cross-referenced with the values. So the things that I want to identify are the room names. So I can take that column from my connected data and drag it over here. I could also take the count of number of incidents and drag that across to the values. So now we're looking at room name based on number of incidents reported for that room. Now you'll notice at the top here that it's saying, look, which diagram do you want to connect this to? Well, there's only one diagram that's really using this data at the moment, and that's my floor 2 diagram. Luckily, it's all set up, so as long as it's sort of saved to OneDrive, SharePoint, or Teams, we can choose to connect to that data. Now the great thing is that this quite thankfully just lights up, it just kind of works. So watch what happens, boom. It's just brought in the diagram. Those shapes are connected to the data that I've highlighted here and here. But you'll notice that we've got blues instead of yellows, and a lot of this is red. So what's actually going on? Well, before I go any further, let's make this a bit bigger and let's expand the field mapping section. So for my report, the ID that we're using is the room name and the values that we're using is the count of incidents. And what I'm going to do is just manipulate this. So we can display this as text or colors. I'm sticking with colors. We could choose the color range. So rather than a blue, I might go for a kind of like an orange. And then we can start to say, you know, what constitutes something being green. I would say that any place that's had less than 5 incidents, I think is going to be maybe a safe area. Anything that's had between 6 and maybe 25 incidents is maybe an area that I might want to highlight as orange. Anything between sort of 26 and let's say 70 is an orange. And anything from 71 to 200 is probably best left alone, the scary kitchen. So as you can see there, the visualizer has actually made it very easy for me to pick parts of my diagram apart. And that's pretty much all I've done really. We can then close the field mapping area. And all I've done is I've added an additional visualization to the same page and connected it up to slightly different data. I've used the room type as a axis rather than the room name, but it's all linked data. So as I kind of select data across this area, it then updates the chart on the other side of the page. Once you're happy with your report, it's then a case of publishing it up to the Power BI service, and then you can send it out to your consumers to make use of that. Cool, right? So I'll just come out of my rather slightly less mature diagram, and let's move on to our summary. So on behalf of Microsoft, we thank you very much for attending our session today delivered by Combined Knowledge. We hope that you've learned some more about Microsoft Visio as to how it can benefit you with an extensive selection of different diagrams. So there's so many stencils that there's certainly many ways that it can sort of breathe life into the diagrams that you create within an organization. We've also discovered that this is a tool that designers can help frontline workers with. So just because people often think, oh, this tool is for office workers, yes, there might be specific people in an organization that create the diagrams, but these diagrams can directly help people on the front line, such as those frontline workers, with essential, clear and informative visualizations to help them understand certain key issues. We also want to mention that we can enhance experiences in other Microsoft applications. Through Visio, we saw the ability to quickly build Power Automate workflows. We can enhance reports. We can generate better slide decks, better documentation in Microsoft Word around our diagrams, and also use that Excel data visualizer to bring the power of Visio directly into our spreadsheets. If you want to learn a little bit more about Visio, definitely check out the Visio blog. If you search for Visio blog in your general search engine, you'll certainly find it. Have a look through there for case studies and updates around the product. Lastly, if you enjoyed the session today, maybe ask your Office 365 administrator if they can activate a free Visio trial for you so that you can enjoy the wealth of functionality that Visio offers you in your day-to-day role. And thank you very much. Rav, did you want to kind of jump in? Just sign off with me?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you for participating in the webinar, and hopefully we'll hear back from you soon. It's been great, thank you.
Thanks very much. Cool. So we appreciate very much, myself and Rav, the time that you spent today in the seminar. Have a very good afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you in another seminar soon. All the best.